Colon cancer can often develop without any noticeable symptoms, especially in its early stages. This means that many people may not realize they have the disease until it has progressed to a more advanced and harder to treat stage. Regular screenings, such as colonoscopies, are crucial for early detection, but despite their importance, a significant number of people skip these screenings, leading to late diagnosis and a higher risk of mortality. In addition, once symptoms are noticed, the sooner they are addressed to rule out cancer, the better. Another growing problem is that studies are showing that younger people are getting the disease, making attention to symptoms and a mindfulness about one's body all the more important. Once a diagnosis occurs, there are a lot of things that can be done to affect the overall outcome. Our guest today, Dr. Handley, will talk about ways of dramatically improving the illness experience using an integrative precision medicine approach. A very common cancer that patients are increasingly talking to me about, and I bet you about, is colon cancer. What are some of the common misperceptions and pitfalls that people encounter when it comes to that diagnosis?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting and concerning things about colon cancer right now is that it's increasingly common. And I think the scariest thing about it is that it's increasingly common in people who are young and otherwise healthy. So this kind of young onset colon cancer is this new phenomenon that really has people scratching their heads, because people in their 30s, 40s, sometimes even in their 20s are developing colon cancer, and it can be fatal.
That young.
That young. Yeah, that young. And so this is a big change. And the question is why? Why is this happening?
Because it's getting younger and younger that you're seeing these cases.
It's getting younger and younger. And there have been a lot of theories. And I think we don't know with absolute certainty yet, but we have a couple thoughts. One of the thoughts is that our diet has changed. And so, the way we eat now in modern times is not the way we have eaten historically. And
there's a close relationship with diet and colon cancer. Again, not such a clear cause and effect, but definitely a clear relationship.
There's definitely a clear relationship. And this is increasingly validated in studies that, there are specific dietary components that increase or decrease risk of colon cancer. And so, like lots of red meat, lots of processed or refined food products can increase risk of colon cancer.
Cured meats.
Cured meats especially. That's a big part of the equation. And one dietary thing that maybe doesn't get as much attention as it should is fiber, which seems like a very simple thing. But if you look at kind of the daily recommended intake for fiber and what people are getting in their diets, typically, people are getting maybe half of what they should be getting. It's actually pretty hard to get as much fiber as is recommended.
How much fiber should people be eating?
So if you kind of look at national recommendations, it's somewhere between 20 and 30 grams. And some would advocate for even more than that, upwards of 40 grams.
How about you as an oncologist? What would you suggest people eat?
I would say try to get 30 to 40 grams of fiber.
Make that real for us. What does that mean?
What does that mean? That means, so the ways that you get fiber is you eat leafy greens, you eat minimally refined carbohydrates. So that would be like whole grain things. Mm-hmm. And so things like chia seeds, if you eat 3 tablespoons of chia seeds, that has, 30% of your fiber for the day or so. But people are not usually eating 3 tablespoons of chia seeds all the time. So it really requires kind of rethinking what you're eating and focusing on a whole foods, plant-based diet.
To get 30 or 40 grams of fiber, what kinds of tools do you suggest people use so that they can have a sense of what their daily intake has in it?
Yeah. So one tool that I often find helpful for people, not for the long term, but for a short period of time, is to use a nutritional tracker for maybe a week or two to just get a sense of what you're actually getting in your diet. And these are tools, you can get apps and there are a variety of them that do this, but they track your total calories, they track your macronutrients like your proteins, your carbohydrates, but they can also track some of these micronutrients like fiber.
I teach my students to use MyFitnessPal. Is that one that works?
That's a great one. There's another one called Chronometer that I use a lot. And this allows you to just easily track your food. I mean, It's always a little bit of a lift to track your food, but you track your food. Sometimes you can just scan things. Sometimes you can just look things up, and you can quantify the amount of fiber that you're getting over the course of the day. And when I have patients do this, they're usually shocked by how little fiber there is, how much sugar there is, how little protein there is. And so doing this tracking, even just for a short period of time, you don't have to do it for a long period of time, but it gives you insight into what you're actually taking in. And so that can be a very useful tool. And once you get some of that general insight, then you kind of develop a sense of like, oh, well, yeah, I guess I do need to eat a lot of vegetables actually, because that's the only way I'm going to get 30 or 40 grams of fiber. Or like maybe I can sprinkle a tablespoon of flax powder into my smoothie or throw some chia seeds in or something like that.
And what about fiber supplements for people who, I'm just not going to eat that much fiber?
Yeah, fiber supplements are okay. Generally we think that it's best to get it from whole foods because the fiber is then balanced with nutrients and things like that. And the advantage to getting fiber in foods is that it kind of helps with the digestion and absorption of other components of the food. It helps make sugars in food, for example, have less of an impact on your blood sugar levels. And so food first is the general thought, but if you can't do it that way, then you can supplement, and that's totally reasonable.
So we have an excess of processed red meats and not enough fiber as contributing factors anyway. Are there any other issues that people should be thinking about?
So all these dietary factors, the reason that they're important is that they affect the health of the microbiome. And the microbiome is really, that's like the elephant in the room when it comes to colon cancer, I think. And I think there's data beginning to emerge that is consistent with this. The microbiome is the collection of all of the cells in your body that are not human cells. And so if you look at the total number of cells in the human body, for every one human cell, there are 10 bacterial cells. There are 10 times as many bacteria in your body as there are human cells. And so if there are 10 times as many of those cells, they've got to be important. And they are. And we're increasingly finding that these bacteria have kind of co-evolved with humans over millennia. And there's this symbiotic relationship between the bacteria and the cells of our body. Some of the things that are most important for nourishing the microbiome are fiber. Fiber is this compound that provides the nutrition that the microbiome can then use to produce vitamins and micronutrients. A lot of vitamins are actually produced in the GI tract. The microbiome helps break down food. The microbiome also helps regulate our immune response. And so when the microbiome is well balanced, it is your best friend. It can help you have energy. It can help all the systems in your body run efficiently. It can help your brain be clear. If your microbiome is disrupted, then it becomes your worst enemy. And it can be very difficult to rebalance it. And increasingly, we're finding a lot of chronic diseases in the modern world are related to dysfunction or dysbiosis in the microbiome. That includes things like cardiovascular disease. That includes things like diabetes. And it also includes things like cancer, especially colon cancer. When you have this disruption in the microbiome, you can get inflammatory changes in the colon itself. And that over time, with chronic inflammation, that can lead to changes in the cells, and it can lead to the development of cancer. And so the microbiome is something we focus on a lot when it comes to the question of colon cancer.
Since we're seeing younger cases of colon cancer, and yet the guidelines for getting a colonoscopy are for older populations, what should people be looking out for in terms of symptoms, how they're feeling? Mm-hmm. That could be a red flag, that there could be something going on that's carcinogenic.
So the biggest red flags are blood in your stool, unexplained weight loss, unexplained fatigue, or low blood counts, which you might notice on like routine blood work from your primary care physician or something like that. So all those things, none of those are ever normal findings. Blood in your stool can be a benign thing. It can be just from something like hemorrhoids, which like those aren't related to cancer. And it's pretty common for people to have hemorrhoids, but it's never normal to have blood in your stool. So if that's something that's coming up, then that's something that should be checked out right away. And hopefully it's just hemorrhoids, but if it's not, then there may be a deeper issue that really needs to be addressed. Similar with weight loss, people shouldn't be just losing weight unless they're trying to. And so if people are losing weight and it's unexpected, then that is reason to be concerned. And then low blood counts for a young male, for example, that would be an uncommon finding because most people are getting enough iron and things in their diet to support their blood counts.
By blood count, you mean red blood cells?
Red blood cells. Yes, I mean red blood cells. It's more common for young women to develop anemia because there's blood loss with menstruation. But if it's persistent, then that's also cause for further evaluation.
So what about patients that you get who've got the diagnosis? They've been diagnosed with colon cancer. How can the combined medical oncology integrative approach that you've developed help them to weather that storm?
One of the things that we think about is we suspect that the microbiome played a role in the development of the cancer. So what are the things that we can do to help rebalance it? And so this is an area where we're beginning to get increasing data, and the data are increasingly good, actually, that certain types of bacteria can be beneficial in terms of improving the effectiveness of chemotherapy, but also reducing the side effects of chemotherapy. And so when it comes to talking about the microbiome, I usually have a structured approach that I use with patients. And that's something that we think about as the 5R approach. And so the 5 R's are remove. So what you want to do with remove is you want to take out things that are potentially causing problems. And so we often think about dietary modification here. We're taking out these highly processed foods. We're taking out these cured meats that have nitrates and things like that in them. If people have particular food sensitivity, say someone's like really sensitive to wheat or dairy, then we say like take those out as well, because that's contributing to inflammation. But the other part of remove is actually removing some of the bad bacteria, because one of the things that can develop is that these bacteria over time can actually form films. It's kind of like a thin film, like on your windshield or something. That kind of film can develop in your intestine, and it's formed by these bad bacteria. And it can be very difficult to break down, and it makes it hard for the GI tract to function optimally. And so we think about kind of strategies to break those biofilms down. And there are certain kind of supplements and other approaches that we use to do that. So that's remove. Then there's replace. And so replace involves replacing things like digestive enzymes or stomach acid or things like that may be deficient in someone who has impaired microbiome. So a lot of people are taking acid blocker medications, for example, because of acid reflux or something like that. In the long term, that can be quite detrimental to the health of the microbiome, because the microbiome has developed to have very specific pH in different parts of it over, and this is developed over millennia. And so often we have to think about how we retweak those things. And sometimes people need digestive enzymes supplemented as well, because if the system is overtaxed, it's harder for it to produce what is needed to break down food.
And that's why a lot of people, I've had patients who, when you recommend the kind of foods that are really important to revitalize the system, I can't digest those foods. I can't deal with those foods because they don't have the enzymes anymore to break them down.
Yeah, because like if you don't lose it, you use it. And that's true with your digestive abilities. And so, oftentimes when people are trying to increase their fiber, that ends up being a problem. And so you may need some digestive enzyme supplementation to do that. Yeah. So the next R is reinoculate. And so this is where we talk about probiotics. And so this is really a fascinating emerging field. But in the world of oncology, one of the bacteria that we are increasingly thinking about is something called Akkermansia. And so this is a bacteria that about 20% of the population doesn't have it. And there have been some very compelling studies, including in some high-tier journals like Cell and Nature, that have demonstrated that if you don't have Akkermansia, you're less likely to respond effectively to chemotherapy or immunotherapy. And so sometimes we supplement with that. Sometimes we supplement with other probiotics that have been studied. There's a whole host of them, but things in the family of Lactobacillus or Bifidobacterium.
See, a lot of people have heard of probiotics, but I think a lot of people aren't aware of all of the studies that have emerged in the last few years that really support the use of them in specialized populations, particularly cancer populations.
Yeah, it's increasingly compelling. And new studies are coming out all the time, again, in very well-respected, high-level journals. And so this is something that we think about a lot, is what's the right probiotic for a particular individual? And when you're thinking about probiotics, you also have to think about, are you supporting the bacteria that you're putting in? And this is where the concept of prebiotics comes in.
That those
That's the food.
Those bacteria need.
That's the food. Yeah. And so we come back to diet, the diet being very important.
That fiber, that prebiotic fiber.
The prebiotic fiber, exactly. So then the fourth R is repair. And so what happens over time when there are these changes in the balance of the bacteria and the GI tract is you can get actually inflammation, you can get damage at the level of the lining of the GI tract. It's kind of like if you've ever had a mouth sore, like an ulcer or something like that. That kind of thing can happen in your GI tract too. And it's also kind of like if you've ever had a sunburn, like that skin is just not working as well as the rest of the skin. And so what do you do in circumstances like that? You do things to try to heal it. And so for a sunburn, you might put like aloe on it. You might put some other type of barrier ointment on it. You might put something that can help speed the healing of it. And we do the same for the GI tract. And so there are certain supplements that we think about that can be very, very nourishing to the lining of the GI tract. Those supplements include things like glycine or glutamine, which are two amino acids that can be very, very beneficial. It includes things like aloe, the same as you would put on your skin. It includes things like, other compounds like quercetin or licorice or ginger or marshmallow root. All these things can be very helpful, and we have formulations and strategies to incorporate these into a protocol for patients.
And is there data that supports these different things as healing entities?
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's increasing data. There's a lot of kind of cellular level data, and there are increasing human studies as well that show that these can be beneficial. And I think the other part of it is many of these agents have actually been used in traditional medicines for generations. And so we can also turn to that type of knowing, which is valid. And there's a lot of wisdom in the world beyond what we know, and we're beginning to appreciate that as well. When we think about repairing the lining of the GI tract, one of the terms that often comes up is the concept of leaky gut. And so this is a term that's really used mostly in integrative medicine and functional medicine. But it is this idea that there's damage to the lining. And when that happens over time, you essentially get these microperforations in the GI tract. The same you would have breakdown on the skin on your arm. You get this breakdown in the skin. And when that happens, the barrier of the GI tract, which is supposed to be impermeable, becomes permeable. And what that means is things that aren't supposed to get into your system can start getting into your system. And that becomes a root cause of a lot of chronic conditions.
And those things could include things like bacteria, viruses, inflammatory chemicals.
Yep, exactly. And this underlies a lot of chronic health issues like food sensitivities, for example, tend to be related to this concept of leaky gut. Autoimmune conditions, increasingly we're finding that there's this connection between autoimmune disease and leaky gut, and cancer as well. Because when you get this leaky gut phenomenon, you get increased inflammatory signaling, and that just leads to significant disruption. And interestingly, the lining of the GI tract and the lining of the brain have pretty similar structures chemically. And so when you get this concept of brain fog, we sometimes think of that as leaky brain, actually, because you get this increased permeability of the blood-brain barrier. And it tends to go hand in hand with leaky gut. So if you have a leaky gut, chances are pretty good that you have a leaky brain too, and vice versa. And so this repair piece ends up being really quite important. And then the final R, the fifth R, is rebalance. And so rebalance is, I think of as kind of like the catch-all. So the idea here is that everything that is happening in your GI tract is relevant to the rest of your body. So if the GI tract is not working well, the rest of the body is probably not going to be optimal either. But the flip side is true too. And so if you're constantly stressed, for example, if your cortisol is through the roof, that's going to affect your whole body, and it's going to affect your microbiome. And so it goes both ways. So you can focus on the gut, but you have to focus on the rest of the body too. And so with rebalance, we kind of zoom out again and say, okay, we got to look at the whole person. We got to look at everything that's going on with this person. And it has to be in the context of the gut too.
That's great. So those 5 R's one more time?
Yeah, so the 5 R's are remove, replace, reinoculate, repair, and rebalance.
Sounds like a great formula.
Yeah, it's a great formula. It's a great formula. And it's something that is easy for people to understand and kind of keep track of over time. It helps people understand why we're doing the things that we're doing and how we envision them to be supporting them.
And so colon cancer patients who you've been able to put on this 5-hour program, what kinds of things do you see?
So some of the first things that happen is people notice kind of a change in their bowel regimen. They notice that, maybe they weren't as regular as they thought they were. Or maybe they used to have a lot of constipation and they thought that was just normal. And now they're more regular. They may notice a little bit more mental clarity, for example. They may not have been aware that there was some brain fog, but when you start treating the gut, some of these things start to fall away. Sometimes energy levels start to improve as well. And so it is pretty amazing that when you start to treat the gut, some of these other systems start to fall in place as well. From a chemotherapy response, we sometimes see that people tolerate their treatments better. And I've had some patients who, like their oncologists are like, how are you doing as well as you're doing right now? And it comes down to them being supported in these various ways. And so, if you get to some of these root cause issues, it can be really a game changer for people as they go through a difficult treatment.
So by tolerating their treatment better, less side effects, and also the way they feel overall?
Yep, right, exactly. So there may be less side effects. There may be less GI side effects because, certainly a lot of these chemotherapies can cause nausea or diarrhea. Chemotherapy is really generally designed to kill cells. And, some of the cells that tend to be most affected are cells in the GI tract. So it's really imperative to support those as much as possible because the GI tract is so important to our overall health. So yeah, less side effects, more energy, more stability in their weight. We sometimes see changes in biomarkers too, like cholesterol or blood glucose or things like that.
And I suppose a goal, and while again, you can't create a direct cause and effect, but a goal is to lower the modifiable risks of a cancer recurrence.
Yep, exactly. And that's really a big part of what we're trying to do with an integrative approach is we're trying to support someone through a difficult time, through the treatment of a cancer, but we're also trying to change the environment of their body. We're trying to create this environment that is not hospitable to cancer. That's like an anti-inflammatory environment. That's the real goal here. It's not just about treating the cancer, it's about treating the whole person and creating resilience.
Thanks for watching our interview with Dr. Handley from the Marcus Institute on how integrative precision medicine is transforming colon cancer treatment and recovery with a focus on rebuilding the whole self. This integrative approach offers new hope for better health outcomes. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up, share it, and don't forget to subscribe for more expert insights. Drop your questions or thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Stay informed, stay healthy, and we'll see you in the next video.